Yo-ho-ho-ho! It is Soul King Crazz. Here with a highly anticipated Sky-type character guide for Pirate Wars 4. He's one of my most played characters in the game. He is easily my favorite Sky-type designed for the game. And let's just face it, out of villain designs, he's also probably my favorite in the series. That's right, it's our love-to-hate Celestial Dragon, turned Warlord, turned weapons manufacturer for Kaido. It's Dofi Don Quixote Doflamingo. Our favorite puppet master is here to show off a few hidden mechanics, a few not so hidden mechanics, and an interesting blend that makes him one of the most devastating debuff characters in this game. Now, out of all of the Sky types in this game, oh shoot, I actually had a bunch of. I was just trying out a bunch of specials. This is not this is not my build for him by any stretch. Now, Doflamingo is a character who is of the Sky type, which means that a majority of his combos are going to be done in the air. This does not mean he doesn't have air game on the ground, but he does have a limited moveset, as do most Sky type characters. That's not to say that his ground game isn't good, but you will be prioritizing your air moves even when you're not in your full force burst. A little bit more different than Crocodile, who definitely seems to manipulate a both balance of air and ground, or Sanji. Post-time skip Sanji is another good example of that as well. Doflamingo's strength is definitely aerial combat. He makes tremendous use of his light string, makes tremendous use of any of his puppet combo variations, but he also has the ability to awaken his Devil Fruit. He can do this with his grounded C3 and his aerial. Actually, no, he can't awaken with any of his aerials. He can only awaken with his grounded C3 and with one of his special skills. It is with his awakened fruit that we will be maintaining a focus on our build. So let's start by loading on our specials. Break White and Ever White are going to be your bread and butter. Ever White is going to awaken your fruit, giving you additional limbs to strike out at your opponents with every single attack. Break White, so Ever White's going to set up your limbs, Break White will detonate them, turning them all into towers of burst damage. Very powerful ones at that. You have a few different ults. I would argue that competitively speaking, Overheat is good. And it's actually very fast, which makes it even better. Its charge time is faster, its damage is decent, and it can be used in the air, which is really the name of the game. However, the Birdcage just looks cooler. It does a lot of armor damage, which is something that Doflamingo admittedly does not have a lot of countermeasures for. And it also kind of gives me an extra incentive to stay on the ground a little longer before you trigger Heavenly Demon, your Force Burst. This is my special build that I like to run on Doflamingo. Now, his counter, the Spiderweb, not my favorite counter in the game, but this does set up for a good illustration of how his debuff works. So what Spiderweb does as a counter, it gives you an aura, and whenever that aura is broken, your counter move happens. And with Doflamingo, it allows you to set up very small group of enemies in your Parasito debuff. This will essentially leave them in a T-pose animation, unable to move, and just perfectly open to take damage. They can't burst. It's just a lot of useful tech with this counter, but all of the tech is already ingrained in your base moveset, which is why I don't run it. Conqueror's Hockey. The animation on it looks really cool for Doflamingo, but a lot of the speed that is normally mitigated through this ult is actually lost because for some reason the ending frames on Doflamingo's Conk Hockey actually keeps him rooted in spot for some reason. You can't dash out of it, and it actually takes away from a lot of that speed. Plus, you can only use it on the ground, so that's another bit of a downer as well. Godthread, I don't hate this ult. It does a ton of damage, but the problem with it is that it has a very niche hitbox. And if we're just going for pure damage on the ground, bird cages are all to go with. Now as for your skills, I always like to prioritize the first 6 for people with the base game only. I would highly recommend running Hidden Resolve. I would also highly recommend running Airborne Adept. You will be spending the majority of your time in the air. Naturally, you'll also want Hero's Strength and Cheat Death as well. And Burst Enhancement, that's already 5 slots. And then for your final slot, I would recommend Deadly Cadence. This will allow you to use Break White without getting interrupted, which can be pretty important. However, if you don't particularly prefer Deadly Cadence and you want to fill up that last slot, if you don't have the DLC, I would recommend Bloodcurdling Blow. It's a solid option for him. To be honest, I think I'm actually going to use Bloodcurdling Blow over Devastating Impact. I think I like that better. Because again, as I said before, even though he can cheat around armor, Doflamingo cannot really auto-break armor like some of the characters can, and he doesn't have a lot of chip damage attacks, which does limit his ability to armor break as effectively as other characters. As for your other skills, I like to run Tenacity and Moonwalk just for additional defense. Top of the World is basically required if you have the DLC. Like, this skill is necessary for Sky types, and especially Doflamingo. If you're not running Moonwalk, honestly, I would say you don't need to worry too much about stamina management if you're running Hidden Resolve, because your special moves will be triggering it constantly. Now, let's start showing off that light strike. Light. 5 lights. He does a little kick. The kick does a little knockback. Really solid move. Doflamingo's light, heavy on the ground. It's his quick little hockey imbued punch. Alright, Vista can actually be a bit of a pain, so let's just get rid of him really quick. So, Vista's currently caught in the Parasito, and let's just get him out of the way real quick. Nice. So, Doflamingo's light, heavy on the ground, your C3, is going to generate 3 awakened string tendrils. They respond to all of your attacks. For all of your attacks that have multi-hit strings. Strings. For all of those multi-hit attacks, the tendrils will correspond. And as I said earlier, with Break White, it will detonate them, which is also very useful as well. 1, 2, 3 lights into your heavy. 1, 2, 3. It's a bit of a mobility attack. It allows you to drag enemies by your strings. And this is a nice little bonus because it lets you move around pretty fast without using stamina. 3, 4 lights into your heavy. 3, 4. As you saw there, it creates this like little brief purple aura. Any enemies in that aura will be bound in the Parasito debuff. The debuff does not register as other status debuffs though. So, for example, with your Lineage Factor skill, it increases the uptime on all debuffs such as fire damage or Hawkins's own debuff or freeze, you know, your ice status debuff, Brooks' hypnosis sleep status debuff. None of those are registered as Parasito is not a Lineage Factor synergized skill, is really what I'm trying to get at here. Wow. So Lineage Factor is not good on Doflamingo, so you really have to make the most out of your uptime with Parasito. But that said, it actually lasts a very lengthy amount of time. And you'll notice a ton of your aerial strings in particular are going to have a bunch of synergy with this theme as well. Your grounded heavy by itself, your C1, will generally make him shoot a flurry of rapid fire string that you can use the control pad to control the directions that they go in. It's a good little way to kind of like close the gap. Ah, there it is. So every now and then, the grounded C1 will instead allow him to draw a pistol and produce effectively the same attack. It doesn't do more damage, it doesn't have a large area of effect, it just looks different. That's really it. That said, the pistol's nothing to write home about. His strings are nothing to write home about. They do a little bit of chip damage, and they're decent for clearing out armor bars, but nothing to write home about. Now, your aerial string, a little bit of rainbow thread. Your aerial light is Black Naito. Both of these moves I like to use as just combo aggressors. These two moves right here are going to generate the most attacks out of a consistent combo string. Also, Black Knight, as you just noticed, it grounds any enemies that are in the air. On that final hit, it grounds enemies that are still alive. Assuming that they've even hit, of course. Light, light, heavy. Parasito. If you mash this one out, it will create devastatingly hilarious results. As you just saw there, the groups of enemies that you ensnare will run around in a circle, flailing around and dealing a metric fuck ton of chip damage. Just an obscene amount. So much damage. I love using Parasito. And with this variation of it, you can perform some really devastating maneuvers, particularly if you cancel out of it before the Parasito finishes in its full animation. You want to cancel out of it to really maximize on the fact that your Parasito has them bound. However, this particular variation is also really good against large groups of enemies if you wanted to actually mash it out to completion. Your light, heavy is overheat. This is a really solid option in the air as well. It does a lot of damage. It does a lot of grouping. And that final hit is pretty devastating. Now, this aerial C5 that Doflamingo has, 2, 3, 4. This attack is obscenely devastating. This attack, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can just ensnare a full boss in it. Just leave him there. And the range on this is so huge. I don't even have to look. I already know he just got snared in it. Let's hit him with a birdcage. He's not going anywhere. Oh wait, he's going in the ground. Your aerial C5 is by far one of your most devastating tools as Doflamingo. You'll be using it all the time. If you mash it out to completion, it creates this little like ballet dance of death where the enemies will spin in place, dealing a ton of damage, and then some parasital threads will come in to finish the job. And then finally we have his aerial C1. I use this move a lot. It's quick. It kind of bounces you up into the air. It's also very good for setting up some of your aerial stuff. It's great for keeping enemies in a single group without knocking them away. Now, as you just saw there, this transitions nicely into playing Doflamingo with your awakened state. You want to constantly have Everwhite out when you have a good grouping set up. You'll want to at least execute 2 to 3 combo strings with the tendrils before you detonate them with Break White. This will give you ample time to recharge Everwhite and to also make sure that your grouping is effective. Make sure you have your Parasito debuff out. And also, what's really good about Everwhite, its activation actually does a lot of damage. Just an insane amount. Everwhite will also activate with your ults, including Birdcage, Overheat, Conk Hockey. Everwhite is just crazy. Your ground game combos really nicely into its activation damage. Whether you're doing it on your grounded C4 or your grounded C1. It's just a really solid option. Using your grounded C3 in combination with Everwhite will increase the range of your tendrils even further if you space them correctly. You can also condense them for more damage opportunities, but I find that this is in vain since there's already so much grouping happening. As far as your full force burst goes, there's no real generic trait for it that separates it from other sky type force bursts. It's just another generic movement speed, damage, defense, etc. buff. It doesn't make him invincible. And when you're fighting as giants, having deadly cadence is going to be really nice for when you want to do that extra bit of burst damage. And now we can just take this build out for a proper speedrun. It took a very long time to understand that his Parasito combos are powerful, but ultimately they are most effective if you just cancel out of them and keep an enemy bound there for good. The beauty of Doflamingo, honestly, is that beyond these few mechanics of his, there's not much hidden tech to him. He's not a college degree required character, right? He's not like some of the DLC characters. He's not like some of the technique characters. He's just a very bread and butter. Like, if you have his essentials in place, then you'll just conquer with him. Let's see if I can really show his stuff on this terrible map. I like the combo from his grounded C4 into his air game. What's really good about your Parasito is that it, unless they're activating their full force burst, which Katakuri was just doing, your Parasito will even affect enemies that have armor, enemies that are in full force burst. The only exception, of course, is, you know, your Logias. Anyone that is immune to damage will obviously ignore your Parasito debuff. Dead enemies, for some reason, do not ignore this debuff, so you can literally use a dead body as a source of damage. And the spacing on this really does help too. Again, like, this allows you to make sure you don't get hit from any other angle. And let's see how fast he melts this boss. Immediately destroyed. Boys. Let's take this fight over to where the action is. Another thing that I really like to do in order to ensure a high competition with Doflamingo is to save your force burst purely for mobility. Because to be honest, with Parasito, you actually don't even really need force burst to just completely decimate targets. I often find myself even forgetting about it. Because with full force burst on, enemies just die immediately. Now, what's good about Break White, even though I always end up using it in tangent with Everwhite, you don't actually need to. If you use Break White by itself, it still creates its own solitary spire of string, but it'll only be centered right on your character's model. It won't actually hit anything away from you. Let's use it right now in the air. Yep. Completely forgot I already had Everwhite out. By itself, though, Break White tends to be a little weaker. Oh, good. They actually put the Transport Commander up closer. That's another good thing about your aerial C5 too, is that even if you send them into their free run animation, you can cancel out of that, and it'll keep them in that free run animation, but you can still like combo into them. I'm actually not used to seeing the Transport Commander spawn in this corner, so I'm not sure how well this is going to go. Oh, well, this seems broken. They're just in a tight hallway? Oh, now they're down there. Thought so. You stealing my wine? So as you saw there, I managed to snag a couple other dead enemies in my Parasito dance there. And as you just saw there, overheat, I forgot to mention this earlier, the final hit, you can change the angle on the final hit so that you end up covering more ground with it. Alright, let's just fly back out of here so we can get some proper bounties. One of these days I'll have to start doing my guides on a new save file, just because I feel like if you don't have the DLC, you're going to be getting a very warped perspective on the power level between having DLC and not having it. Oh yeah, forgot to use my ground game. But yeah, Doflamingo, he's always been one of my favorite characters, and finally gets to really stretch his limbs and flourish with the Sky type. And looking forward to our next character guide where we will be cracking open another Sky type. One of my personal favorites from the days of Pyro Warriors 3. We'll be looking at our boy Rob Lucci. Hope you enjoyed this guide. Until next time.